Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Psychology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Griffin, and joining me in my virtual studio today is Dr. Gary Daynes. How are you doing, Gary?
I'm well. Thanks, Brandon. It's great to be able to spend some time with you today.
Gary, do you want to give us a background about who you are? I came across your name on LinkedIn. We've been connected for some time, but you've done work in the education sphere. You are doing educational consulting and consulting with other firms. But could you give us your background, your educational background, your work background, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, Brandon, thanks. So I'm a historian by training and got a PhD in American history, started teaching at a very large university where, the average class size, because I was a brand new faculty member, was like several hundred at a time. And I thought, like, on the one hand, this is kind of fun. But on the other hand, I wasn't sure that learning was actually taking place. So early in my career, I moved to a small university, Westminster College, now Westminster University in Salt Lake City, Utah. And since that time, I've had a mix of roles. I've often taught, but usually have also done administrative work on the side. So I launched the Center for Civic Engagement. I was an associate provost. And now at this point in my career, I've been a provost at 2 schools, a vice president for enrollment at 3 schools. And for the past several years, have been doing consulting work on the side with small distinctive organizations, often colleges, but sometimes schools or nonprofits or churches. And most of the consulting around helping those organizations get clear on who they really are, what their distinctives are, and then line up their operations with that thing, right? Their vision, their mission, and the actual people that they serve. So instead of trying to sort of be a big generic organization, even if they're small, to try to actually be a small, focused, distinctive organization and both take advantage of that, but also be willing to be guided by the constraints, to not try to do everything, to not compete with a bigger organization if you are small and focused. So I live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina now, but grew up in the West in Utah and Colorado. So that's me.
Wonderful. So the reason why I wanted to interview you is you're coming out with a book. The book is called How to Be a Small College, Essays on Small Schools and the Communities that Support Them. So you talked about how you started your career, you were at a large university, and now you're interested in helping small colleges really find their niche, stand out. Do you want to walk us through some of the challenge? Well, before we do that, actually, do you want to define what a small college is? Because everyone may have a different idea of what small is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in the United States, right, there are several thousand colleges and universities. The ones that are most well known are either large, by which I might say it has more than 15,000 students, but many of them have 20, 30, 40,000, right? So they're either large in scale and or they are large in prestige. So you might think of an institution like Harvard or Yale that doesn't have 40,000 students, but it really helps shape the mindset, policy, the sort of assumptions that exist out there about what colleges and universities are. So on the other end of the scale, you have thousands of small colleges, some of them public, but most of them independent colleges. And many of them were founded by religious organizations or civic organizations. They tend to sometimes be in small towns or in neighborhoods in large cities. And these are the sorts of institutions that I'm most interested in, both because I think they're in a really tough spot in the market, right? Like if you have 1,000 students and you're in rural Iowa, it's harder to flourish than if you have 40,000 students and you're in Boston. But also because I think these sorts of institutions both serve an audience that isn't well served by larger universities, and they hold out the possibility or the promise of offering the sort of education which I think is distinctive and which might actually enrich both the local community and the lives of the students and families who go there, but also our broader culture, right? So you might think of these schools as the equivalent to like an artisan bakery or a craft brewery, right? They do a few things, they do them well, they often aren't well known, they often aren't well resourced, they're sometimes in out of the way places. But I care a lot about these schools, both because I've worked in a number of them, I've consulted with them, but I think because they are an essential part of what it means to have a good society in the United States, or to say it the other way around, if they were to die or to weaken, we would have a diminished society, not just a diminished higher education sphere, but those communities, the families, the lives of the students who go there would be diminished because they didn't have access to these sorts of institutions. So when I'm talking about a small college, then small in enrollment, often not well resourced, sometimes in out of the way places, and certainly not the sort of school that you would hear about if you turned on ESPN or if you read the New York Times. Those aren't the sorts of schools I'm interested in.
So I think all colleges and universities are facing an issue with enrollment, with, we're going to hit a population declines, kind of this demographic cliff in the upcoming years. So we started to see some smaller colleges and universities really struggle, and I've even heard some closings. But from the student side, what do these smaller colleges offer that maybe a larger university, for me, I'm in the state of Alabama, that University of Alabama or one of these larger schools can't provide? Because I chose my school, it was just close proximity to my home. It's, I got a scholarship, but it was a school with 45,000 students, Utah Valley University. So talking about a school with 1,000 students in rural Iowa, why would I choose that, or why would a student choose that versus a state flagship?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not making the argument that like every single student should prefer a little school over a big school.
Yeah.
I went to a big university as an undergraduate. Some of my kids went to big universities. It was the right fit. So for a student, really finding the right fit is the most important thing. Now, I think there are components of fit that exist at small colleges that may not exist at larger ones. One of the things that you talked about, which I think is really important, is locality, right? I mean, we tend to think about students making a choice amongst all the universities in America. Well, that's just nonsense, right? Like most students go to school within 100 miles of where they live. So if you happen to live in rural Iowa, sure, you might be close to the University of Iowa, but you might also be close to St. Ambrose University or Mount Mary or Mount Mercy or something like that. And so that close proximity matters. So I think that's one thing. A second thing is that even though every college and university in the United States says, we have small class sizes, your faculty members will know you by name, you will not be a number. Those things, I think, are more likely to be true at a well-organized, systematized, well-thought-through small college than they are at a large university. Now, it's true that small colleges don't always do those things well, right? They often are small. They have broken systems. Nobody knows who you are. You like try to add a class and nobody can figure out how to do it, right? So it's not, to be at a small college is not a panacea. But nonetheless, those sorts of things that many people care about often exist at small colleges. But the thing that I think that has the greatest potential for small colleges is the possibility of having a distinctive educational experience that is truly forms you in relationship with the community that you care about. So again, if you look at the small colleges and universities that are out there, many of them have religious origins. And now they may have stepped away from those in the recent past. And I think that's actually a problem, right? I mean, many small colleges have become more generic. And if you're generic, why would somebody choose you as opposed to a less expensive, better resourced public university down the road? But the religious origins or the civic origins of those schools often have particular views about what it means to be a human being, what it means to contribute to society, how it is that you might be formed and choose a vocation. And I think those things matter, right? And they particularly matter at a time when there's uncertainty, broad uncertainty in American society about the purpose of education, about the quality of our political life, about what it means to have a good job. And I think small institutions have a better shot than big ones at answering those questions in a way that seems authentic and distinctive for the people that choose them. And I guess the last thing I would say about that is that, small colleges are by definition not a place for everybody. So if they do a good job of saying like, we do this thing, but not that thing, then hopefully students are making a better choice up front. So they're not getting a semester into school and thinking like, why the heck did I decide to go here? I should have gone to that other place. So I think all those things are reasons, right, to care about small colleges, but because they're local tie, because they do certain things well that human beings desire, especially when you're 17 or 18 years of age, and because they have the opportunity to offer a sort of formation or a distinctive form of education that might in fact be essential, not just for the lives of their students, but also for the broader society.
So for a school, let's get down to some of the financials, because I think every school has a greater, broader mission than purely making money paying its bills. But that's the financial reality. So
Yeah.
one thing that you highlight in your book, you say that you don't want, or smaller colleges shouldn't mimic these larger universities. But if finances come in through tuition dollars, maybe they're not funded by the state, maybe they don't have some large endowment that they can draw from. Obviously schools are going to want tuition dollars to come in, but why don't you think colleges should mimic the playbook of these larger universities?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not the case that small schools should just like look away from large universities, because they're actually sources of real innovation, right? And excellence. And many of them have like really deep ties to the local community. So small colleges ought to pay attention to and copy those things. But I think there are a couple of things that if small colleges copy them from large universities, they will both weaken their distinctiveness, but also weaken their operational ability. So, for instance, on the enrollment management side, large universities have a broader reach than small colleges. So, like, down in the weeds, they buy more names, they try to recruit more students in, they have a more sort of a more well-articulated apparatus for trying to get students from all over the United States. Lots of small colleges have copied that, right? They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with enrollment consultants to try to enroll 200 first-year students. That's not because they think it necessarily makes a lot of financial sense, but because they feel compelled to sort of follow the best practices of larger institutions. So I think that's one piece. A second thing is that small colleges sometimes look at large universities and try to offer all the things or most of the things that a large university has, right? So like you'll go to a small college campus and you might get a tour where the guide says something like, we have 75 majors and 50 clubs. And if we don't have a club you like, you can start a club. So maybe that's appealing to students. I think it was more appealing to students 20 years ago when like students really wanted choice, when choice was seen as an attractive thing. But in our culture today, like too many choices is negative. And if you're a first generation college student and somebody says like, you got 75 majors to pick from and 50 clubs, you're probably going to say like, how do I pick? So that's, in terms of like aligning with actual students, that's a problem. But operationally, if you have 75 majors and 50 clubs and you have 1,000 students, you are operationally inefficient, right? That means you have a whole bunch of small majors, or you have two big majors, right? Like you've got business and social work, and everybody else has like 5 majors. Well, that's not an effective way to run your institution. I think another thing that small colleges do, because they are trying to be like big institutions, but probably isn't wise, is their organizational structures tend to mimic large institutions. So at a big university, you might have a senior staff, right? A cabinet of a president and 7 vice presidents. But their salaries all told might be like 1% of the operating budget. I know lots of small colleges that have a cabinet that's exactly the same size as that at a large institution, but their salaries take up 10 or 15% of the operations. So if you just like think about the bottom line, and a student's paying you $10,000 in tuition and another $10,000 to live on campus, and 15% of the personnel costs are tied up in 10 people who don't actually generate revenue, then it's probably just a business model that doesn't make good sense, right? So I think all of those things are ways in which small colleges, by looking to large universities or by assuming that they can grow into a large university, that that's a desirable thing, and sort of build operations that both lead them to be unfocused, that may not actually speak well to the students who are most likely to go to them, and that bring their bottom line into question. And so part of the work that I sort of argue for in the book, and part of the work that I do with my consulting company, is to help schools say, this is our mission. These are the things that are essential to it. This is how much revenue we actually get from the actual students who want to come in. How do we line up the essential practices with the revenue that we have? And if those aren't in alignment, you've got to find creative solutions, right? I mean, we're starting to see this now with mergers between small colleges, or whether they're like merging the back office, right? Like if you have two colleges with 1,000 students, you probably don't need two chief financial officers or two provosts. You probably need one. I see that as small institutions trying to line up their operational realities with the actual enrollment and revenue situations that they find themselves in. And hopefully that's good for them in terms of being distinctive and viable as well.
Mm-hmm. So if a school is really trying to find their thing, if they're trying to find their strength, they want to emphasize it, either it's, a couple programs that they have, or maybe it's the location. How can you help a university in your consulting work? Or if I'm a leader at a smaller college, how can you help me find what we're distinct at that we need to focus on?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things, right? Small colleges, because of their histories, and especially those that were formed as liberal arts colleges, are sometimes uncomfortable with like the actual world in which they find themselves. So today, a very high proportion of students that go to college, including small colleges, want to study what they see as a major that leads to a profession. And a school that thinks of itself as a liberal arts college might think either that's not good, or we can't possibly offer a business major that's as good as the business major down the road. Those sorts of institutions, I would encourage to bear in mind that through most of history, the liberal arts actually were professional degrees, right? They led you to be a priest or a business owner, or to start a school, or to work in journalism, or to become an attorney, or to become a teacher. And so it's not that the liberal arts and getting a job are in tension with each other. Historically, they've been in alignment with each other. It's just that the jobs are different today than they used to be. So anyways, that's one thing. Like, pay attention to what your students are interested in, and the things that they are interested in that you can provide well, provide them very well, and provide them in a distinctive way. So I've seen all sorts of small colleges, for instance, that have business or data analytics programs, which are flourishing at big universities. They flourish for a different reason at that small school, because they might have a richer ethics component, or a more well-defined practice component, or an internship, or the sciences where undergraduates are like in the lab actually doing science stuff as sophomores instead of as graduate students. That is to say that there are ways to pay attention to the actual world, the actual interests of your students, and then line up your programs with them. I think a second thing, and this is both for the good of the college and also the good of the communities that support them, is that small colleges need to be more deeply committed to local economic development, right? Like if most of your students come from the locality from within 100 miles of you, and the economy within 100 miles of you is struggling, you will have fewer students who are willing to come to your institution and pay tuition. So it seems to me that part of this, both the civic mission, the survival story, and also the learning that small colleges can provide to their students, is by being deeply involved in the economic and civic life of their communities, even if the majors that you offer aren't necessarily economic development sorts of majors. And I guess the final thing I would say is that I'm seeing a return or a reassertion amongst small colleges of some of their founding values, especially if they are religious values. And this is super interesting to me, right? Because young people are the least religious cohort in American society. So you might think it's dumb to reassert religious values when young people don't care about them. But I think the thing that religious values do allow schools to do is, like we were talking about at the beginning, sort of frame up a set of ways that a student becomes an adult that actually have meaning. They also, of course, allow an institution to say, we do this thing, but we don't do that other thing. And many of them actually translate richly both into the curriculum and into student life. So I see that as kind of a thing that will be resurgent in the United States in small colleges, as sort of a recommitment, if not to the founding denomination itself, at least to a set of values that are rooted in some kind of ethical worldview, and that go deeper, that hold students to a higher expectation, that hold faculty to a higher expectation than just, hey, go to college, you'll explore some stuff and become a good person, or hey, go to college, get a job, make a salary. So I think in as much as small colleges can do those things, it helps them both focus, it helps them create the environment in which they can flourish, and hopefully it allows them to say, we do this thing and we don't do that thing. And here are the reasons we don't do that thing.
You posted on LinkedIn about religions and colleges just recently. I don't know if that was a chapter from your book or just a short little excerpt you're writing about. But why, as a historian, why did these small colleges move away from either their religious origins or abandon this religious background that they had?
Yeah, so a whole bunch of complicated reasons, right? Like one of them is that religious denominations, especially the mainline denominations that founded a lot of schools, like Methodists, for instance, have been in decline in terms of membership for a long period of time. And because of that, just on the practical side, they have often reduced both the funding that they can share with schools that are associated with the denomination and also sort of the level of commitment to those institutions. So that's one side. That's like the church side. In the places where that hasn't happened, schools have retained a stronger religious culture and a stronger tie. But the other thing is that schools made a set of decisions, and this was, I think, really prevalent between, say, like 1985 and 2010, 2015, to distance themselves from the religious origins of their schools. And they did this for a bunch of reasons, right? Like I said, the religious denominations were in decline. Colleges often read a religious commitment as something that might chase away a bunch of students. And that was a period of time when college enrollments were growing, right? So if the market is growing, you want to do everything you can to entice as many people as possible to come to you. And so lowering barriers to entry is a way to do that. Now that enrollments are declining, though, saying, like we talked about before, like, hey, come here, it's like good for everybody. We have lots of things. Probably isn't going to attract students because they can get that same message at a larger institution. So I think that's part of the background that is leading schools to sort of reassert their founding values. You need to be distinctive about something. This isn't a bad thing to be distinctive about, especially if you can translate it in a way that goes beyond your denomination. So I had an exchange with a colleague on LinkedIn after I made that post who has worked at a series of Methodist institutions, and they've done a good job of translating some of the founding insights from John Wesley into language that's attractive to students of all religious backgrounds or none, because it speaks to like how it is that as a human being you grow and become ethical in relationship to other people. I think students are hungry for that, or at least they dislike the absence of it, and so it's worth a shot.
Yeah, and I think one example of this is, growing up in Utah, I was a fan of BYU, Brigham Young University, and right now, Brigham Young University, which is the flagship school for the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their starting quarterback is Jewish, and that's kind of been a big story right now of how, you have this religious school, which is, high 90% LDS versus starting quarterback, the most popular person on campus is Jewish. So I think I think that is a distinctive advantage, colleges can have. But I want to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah,
so
sure.
We've been talking about some of the distinctive things that schools, these smaller colleges can have, how they can embrace their roots, how they can really focus on the economic development of the community, how they can be good at some just their key competencies. But what challenges do you see facing small colleges going forward, and also the broader educational landscape?
Sure. So let me start with the broader educational landscape, right? It's so you mentioned earlier, like the demographic cliff, that is a decline in the number of students who are of age to graduate from high school. And that is certainly a concern, though if you look at the trends, when the number bottoms out at about the number of high school graduates that there were in 2004. And so like a lot of these schools were doing fine in 2004. So it's not that that the decline in the number of teenagers is like the absolute cause of crisis. Okay. But one of the things that is contributing to crisis is that there is a declining proportion of those students who want to go to college. there is broadly in our culture, and it's true across the political spectrum, an increasing distrust in colleges and universities, or an increasing skepticism about the value of a college education. And during that period of growth, many schools leveraged every penny that they had to build new buildings. So they took on a lot of debt. So you've got this situation where there's a decline in the number of students who are graduating high school. Of them, there's a decline in the proportion who are going to go on to college. There is a broad consensus in society that going to college isn't essential, or at least there are many really good pathways that don't require you to go to college. And you have schools that have built a business model that really was based on assumptions of growth or increases in revenue year over year. So those things together are pretty poisonous. And they're pretty poisonous not just for small colleges, but also for smaller non-flagship public institutions, right? Who are, regional universities are, their enrollments are declining rapidly. Enrollments of public institutions in sort of non-cool places are declining as well. So it's a whole sort of constellation of issues that are facing not just independent colleges, not just small colleges, but colleges in general, except for those ones that we talked about at the beginning, right? Like University of Alabama is going to be fine. Harvard will do just fine into the future. Western Governors in Southern New Hampshire, they seem to have got it sorted. It's like all the others, non-prestigious, non-wealthy, don't have the best football team in America. Probably a moment of concern.
Hmm. And do you see anything specifically for small colleges? Because I think those impact, all universities and colleges. But do you see anything beyond that for the small colleges?
Yeah. So some of it are extensions of those things, right? So like the narrative that's out there about wokeness particularly focuses on independent colleges, right? So, the Congress called in the president of MIT and Columbia and Penn and Harvard for hearings about wokeness. Well, those are four very prominent independent schools. And that sort of context spills over into small private colleges as well. So I think that's one sort of exacerbation of the problem. I'm not sure that's a word, but it should be a word, right? It makes the problem worse for small institutions. A second of them is that, we live in a country where wealth and population is flowing to major metropolitan areas, particularly on the coast. So you could be a great small college in rural Iowa, and if the population continues to empty out, you may not be able to make a go of it. And so small schools face a much more immediate existential challenge, particularly because they don't have the sort of subsidies that a public university would in that same geographic location. And then I think it's likely to be the case that many small schools will find it impossible to make the adjustments to their operations, like to make the bottom line work out on their balance sheet in a way that will help them survive. So I'm actually super interested in a little trend that hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, but it is people starting new, very small colleges. And they're doing that in part because they are responding to cultural change, in part because they want to create like anti-woke schools. There's a number of those. But it's also the case that if you were going to build a college from the ground up, you probably wouldn't build one that looks exactly like the ones that we have today. And it's simpler, at least conceptually, to do it as an entrepreneur than it is to try to take something that's already in place, probably, and readjust the whole apparatus and deal with like the built environment and your debt covenants and all that stuff to get to sustainability. So I expect we will have more small colleges that close, more of the ones that don't close be smaller and smaller. But we'll also see, I think, a flowering of new small colleges getting built. They'll probably be low cost. They won't have like big campuses the way that colleges do today. They may be very distinctive, but they will figure out how to get by with 200 students or 500 students instead of 2,000 or 5,000 students. So I think that's worth keeping our eyes on.
And I think that would be very, very appealing to, different students, whether you're an adult learner, whether you're a first generation college student, if you're someone who has to work and maybe you don't want the things that come with the traditional college experience. Like maybe you don't want to go live on the dorm for 4 years. Maybe you don't want to do all the things, but you have a family, or you just want to get in, get out, get it done. I could see, some of these new schools popping up doing that. So I think that's a great thing. I didn't realize that was a thing. So I think that's a fascinating trend.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's this little school that just opened up this year, right, called the College of St. Joseph the Worker. It's in Steubenville, Ohio. It's a Catholic institution, and it mixes sort of classical liberal arts education with training in the trades. It's super interesting, right? Mm-hmm. There's a school that got founded 2 years ago in Raleigh, North Carolina, called Thales College. And they don't have, you can move to Raleigh, but you got to get your own apartment. There are 3 majors there, classical liberal arts, education, and engineering, because they think that they've got niches there. It's a super tightly defined curriculum. You don't get a lot of choice, but that means it's also efficient and the outcomes are consistent across the students. And they don't take any federal financial aid, right? I mean, they've been able to price it in a way that they think it is affordable for students without them having to borrow. So, it's not like there will be 10,000 tiny small colleges all flourishing. But as is often the case, if you look for innovation on the margins, you can find it in ways that might influence sort of more mainstream practice.
And I've even seen, I don't know if this would count, but like Peterson University, I've seen Jordan Peterson has all of his material. He's launching something. I don't necessarily think you can get credentials on there, but it's more just the information that's going to be accessible. But I want to make you mad for a little bit. So hypothetical, yeah. I'm a business professor. I do think having a well-rounded education is good, but if students are tying the college degree to specific outcomes, why don't we just jettison liberal arts? Why can't I just immediately take a marketing class? Why do I have to take history? I'm not going to be a historian. So thinking broad, moving away from small colleges, but just education in general. Why do I need to waste my first 2 years of school if it's not going to apply to my career?
Yeah, that's a serious question, right? And one that small colleges and large universities have shied away from. It is true that general education in the first couple of years, unless it's like super well designed and incredibly well taught, wastes a lot of people's time because it's got learning all backwards, right? Like people tend to learn from the specific to the abstract, but the way our college curriculum is designed is from the abstract to the specific, right? Like study philosophy, then learn how to write a marketing plan. That doesn't match both where students are when they come to an institution, and it doesn't match how our intellect develops as a human being. So I think it would be actually a super interesting experiment to flip the curriculum. You want to be in marketing, start with marketing, and then take a philosophy class as a senior. It probably makes the philosophy class or the general education more applicable to the real world work that you will be doing. You're probably better able to understand what Aristotle has to do with marketing. So I'm sort of with you, Brandon, and I can imagine ways that, in fact, I think we probably see this in a lot of trade schools where people learn in a sort of a hands-on sense the lessons that might be taught in the abstract in general education, right? Like if you're a contractor, you're problem solving all day long, right? Like no piece of wood is actually straight, no straight line, walls aren't vertical. You got to figure all this stuff out. And doing that work with your hands and your mind ultimately, I think leads to habits of mind that are useful in civic life, in reading literature, in thinking about moral questions. So I'm not actually all that opposed to the thing that you're proposing. And you could imagine a school that really took advantage of that and did something fantastic.
Well, I think it'll be exciting to see what happens with small colleges, what happens with the broader educational landscape. But before we end this interview, I ask I ask everyone the same question. Based on your LinkedIn, based on your background, it seems like that you've achieved some professional success. If someone wanted to be successful in business, or in your instance, maybe in educational administration, what advice do you have for them?
Do not think that you're going to have a career trajectory, right? Like that there's this path that you follow. Maybe you will, but you should imagine your life less as a path than as a map. Um, and that way, at any moment in your life, you can look around and say, like, oh, here I am on the landscape of my life. I say this because I told myself for a long time, Gary, you're going to be a college president. So I took a series of decisions that I thought were setting me up to be a college president. And I got on the cusp of it. And I discovered two things. One, I think the job of college president probably is not all that attractive. And two, nobody wanted to hire me as a college president. Now, maybe those two things went together. So it forced me to take a look around, right? I'd failed to do that. I just thought like, oh, straight path, college president, we'll live in the house, we'll have people eating breakfast in our kitchen and donating money, right? And then I looked around one day and realized that that wasn't it. And it required me to lift my head up, to see the world in which I lived, and to realize that it was great without me needing to be a college president, and that there were all sorts of things that I could do, that I had done, that had real meaning, that I could only grasp when I gave up this notion that my life was going to be in a straight line, and instead was willing to see the environment in which I was working and come to love that particular environment. So in the same way that a small school needs to embrace the community, the landscape around it, I think people need to do the same sort of thing throughout their lives.
I think that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. In my mind, I have a trajectory that I want to go to, but I'll try to keep that in mind if things, take an exciting new turn or don't pan out how I want it.
Well, I hope your trajectory is the right one for you and that it brings you success and happiness, to be sure.
Thank you, Gary. If people want to connect with you, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to hire you, where do they go?
Yeah, so my website is gdaynes.com. That's GDAYNES.com. My company's called Back Porch Consulting, or you can email me at gdaynes@gmail.com.
Wonderful. So everyone, look out for Gary Daynes' book, How to Be a Small College, Essays on Small Schools and the Communities that Support Them. When will that be released?
It'll be released late next summer.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. Go follow Gary Daynes, hire him for your consulting work. But everyone, you have a great day and happy learning.
Take care.